welcome back to the channel. It's your girl, Savannah Smiles, and let's flip that back. So recently passing, I mentioned a Labor Day weekend that was so disastrous that I ended up in urgent care. Previously on Savannah Smiles. Last year for Labor Day weekend, we went on a trip that turned into a mess that landed me in urgent care. That's a really long story, and if you want to hear that, I can do a video on that another time. Enough of you were really interested to find out what happened with that, so I decided to make it a story time because it's kind of a long story and it isn't what it seems it is. So I'm gonna preface this and say that I don't have any B-roll for this. This was far before I ever started doing YouTube, and I learned to start taking out my phone and recording things when they start to go south. Because of this, I'm gonna be using other footage and text screenshots and screenshots of different emails and stuff, so that way you guys can see what's going on. This story spans across multiple days, so to simplify this, I'm going to separate the days into separate chapters to make it easier to understand. So let's get into this video of how I ended up in urgent care for Labor Day weekend. We booked the Airbnb and we were attempting to get an early check-in because we were leaving Thursday night and we were supposed to get there Friday morning. So we were leaving Southern California to go to Kings Beach, Tahoe, so it was a little bit of a trek. Graham and I both couldn't manage to get more than like a day off from work, so we wanted to make the most out of the trip, and so we decided that this would work best for us to arrive there in the morning instead of spending the whole day driving there. Keep in mind, at this point in our relationship, Graham and I didn't live together. I remember texting him this day about how excited we were and how much we couldn't wait to go up. And I also remember that night on the phone complaining that I had a mild ear pain in both of my ears. Me too. Kind of on a different note, my ears have been bothering me all day and I have no idea why. So the next morning, I was sure I had an ear infection. I've had so many ear infections. My mom and I actually counted it up, and by the time I turned 18, I had gone to the doctor and been diagnosed with an ear infection 21 times. And sometimes I had them in both ears. So I was pretty experienced and knew what I was talking about when I thought I had an ear infection. Along with the ear pain, I also woke up super congested, so I was taking Claritin D to try to get that down. I ended up texting Graham to let him know what was going on, and he urged me to go to a doctor. Along with waking up and thinking I had an ear infection, I also woke up incredibly congested, and I ended up taking Claritin D to try to get it to decongest. Somehow I woke up that morning with a super stuffy nose and also a post-nasal drip, so I don't even know how that's possible. My mom and Graham both urged me to go to a doctor since Hi Ramsey. You're right in the shot. Yeah. Oh, you see it? You see the camera? At this point, my mom and Graham were urging me to go to a doctor prior to going up to Tahoe. I don't know if you've ever had an ear infection and gone up to an elevation, but it makes it hurt 1,000 times worse. So they really wanted me to start getting it taken care of before going up there. Me being me, I refused to go to the doctor because keep in mind, I had had so many ear infections at that point. I didn't want to go on antibiotics again, and I felt at this point it was super mild, so I just wanted to let it try to heal on its own. And a little spoiler for this, it wasn't an ear infection. It just wasn't. Besides that, though, the rest of the day was pretty uneventful. So the next morning, after much convincing on my mom's part, I finally made an appointment to go to the doctor. At this point, I was so much worse that my ears were giving me an intense pain, and it couldn't really eat or drink anything because it hurt to swallow because my throat was so sore. It was so bad too that my boss ended up texting me after work to make sure I actually went to the appointment because everybody could tell how bad I was. At some point during my day, I ended up letting Graham know that I made this doctor's appointment and I would have to go to that before we could leave. So I got through my work day fine, and after work, I headed over to the doctor's appointment with my mom. My mom went with me because she knows I have a really bad fear of doctors, so she came with me for moral support. At the doctor's appointment, she took a quick look at me and told me that I was in fact just really congested and that could be causing the pain in my ears, but I did not have an ear ear infection. I described my symptoms to her, and then she ended up telling me that I had a really bad cold. Word for word, she told me I had a really bad cold. If you couldn't already tell this is gonna be wrong, it is. It's so wrong. Then she prescribed me Flonase, which is an allergy nasal spray and a mild antibiotic to get rid of the cold. She also advised I start taking day and NyQuil so that way I can manage the cold symptoms until the antibiotic gets rid of it. Now, you might be thinking, she prescribed you a nasal allergy spray for cold, and you would be right. Yes, she did. At this point, I feel I should have realized that I needed to get a second opinion, but I did not. I picked up and paid for my prescription at a nearby CVS and went home where Graham was waiting for me to head up to Tahoe. Without a hitch, we started our night drive. About the Palmdale, Lancaster area, I informed him of the doctor's diagnosis, and I told him it was really difficult for me to swallow and it felt like I had something stuck on the back of my throat. He decided to pull over and take a look at my tonsils and saw a myriad of tonsil stones covering tonsils that were at least double their normal size. I will admit I did not start taking the antibiotics yet, as I wanted to see if it could take care of itself. I had no idea though how bad it had gotten. We made it to Mammoth, California around midnight that night and checked in at a hotel to stay till morning. I had a really hard time sleeping that night, and Graham said I was snoring, which I never do unless I absolutely cannot breathe through my nose. We got up around 7 or 8 in the morning and checked out of the hotel. We took the car to a nearby supercharger and then walked to a nearby restaurant to grab a bite to eat for breakfast. I don't remember what we ate for breakfast, but I do remember buying sandwiches for later in the day from Shots. I do know I barely ate any breakfast because my throat was hurting so bad and it had gotten progressively worse. After the car was finished charging, we left Mammoth and continued our drive. We made it up to the Tahoe area around 1:30 and we immediately headed over to the Truckee Rafting Company, I think it's called, because we booked a 2 o'clock rafting experience. We barely made it in time for check-in, and then we almost immediately hopped down on a raft and took off. The whole rafting portion of this trip was a lot of fun, and I took a few pictures and a few Polaroid pictures, but there's not much to report on this. After this whole thing, we made it to our Airbnb and got settled in. We found a nearby all-you-can-eat sushi place, so we were very excited to go try this out. It was really at this point in the restaurant when I noticed how bad I had gotten. I could barely swallow the food without choking because of the size of my tonsils. I excused myself to the bathroom, and at this point was the first time I checked out my tonsils. I noticed they were at least 5 times the size of normal tonsils, and they had giant tonsil stones all over them. Me being me, don't do this at home. I tried to pick them off, but I stopped when I almost puked. I got out of the bathroom and still tried to eat, but at this point I was getting extremely nauseous from almost choking so many times. Also, about now, I noticed I was so exhausted, I felt like I was about to pass out on the table. Graham quickly gobbled up the rest of his dinner and paid for ours, and then took me back to the Airbnb. I tried to fall asleep so I could get a good night's sleep, but inevitably had difficulty staying asleep during the night. This was also the first night I started to take the antibiotics. My day started in the early hours of the morning when I woke up choking and ran to the bathroom to puke. Super fun. After this, I was able to sleep somewhat until 6 a.m. when I puked twice before we left for parasailing. Now, before you ask, Graham said this was a terrible idea, but I was still insisting we go. At this point, it was too late for a refund, and I wasn't just gonna pay to go for nothing. We went down early and we stopped at a mini mart to try to grab some soft foods I could attempt to eat. At this point, it had been a while since I'd eaten more than a few bites, and we thought that this would help my exhaustion. After finishing up at the mini mart, we walked over to the docks and got boarded on the boat for parasailing. Parasailing was actually super fun, but there's nothing related to this story to report here. What I will say is I had like zero energy all morning, but I managed to get up enough energy to seem semi-normal for parasailing. After parasailing, I just started to slump in terms of energy, health, and just overall exhaustion, and all I wanted to do was sleep. So Graham took me up to the Airbnb where I slept for actually a long time. If I had to be honest with you, I would would say this just has to do with the fact that I hadn't slept well in multiple nights, and I was doing so much worse health-wise. All my body wanted to do was just shut down and sleep. So that night, Graham and I went back down into town and we got dinner somewhere. I think I ate a soup or something. I don't really remember. It's not important, so we'll just skip over that. But what I will say, which is important to this story, is that night we noticed I was getting super, super warm, and we believe that I was starting to run a fever then. This morning, I was so warm and I was so out of it. Graham called my mom so that way they could try to find an urgent care within my health plan because I was so out of it I couldn't have done it myself. Graham was an absolute doll and drove me there. To be honest with you though, I don't remember much of this drive or really even much of this morning. I just kind of remember being in the urgent care. Where this story gets really fun for you guys and was such a disaster for me is pretty much, to sum up a really long conversation with the doctor, they checked everything out and then he looked at my throat and said, "Yep, you have tonsillitis." And then he went on to say, and I kid you not, this is word for word, Graham can verify this, he looked at me and said, "Your tonsils are horrible." Not the worst I've seen, but horrible. Now, here is the part of the story where you get the tea. It's where all the tea gets spilled, it's everything. So Graham brought along every single medication I had been taking, the Flonase, the antibiotics, the Dayquil, to ask him what I should keep taking, what I should discontinue taking. I also completely admitted to this guy that I did not start taking the antibiotics till later, and I asked him if that would have reduced my symptoms of tonsillitis or would have made it go away altogether. I kid you not, he said, and I quote, and I texted Graham to make sure this was correct, so I'm going to be reading it from my phone here, but, well, these antibiotics maybe would have prevented your fever from being as high, but these antibiotics you would typically prescribe for a really bad cold. So exactly what she told me I had. I'm not sure why your doctor would have prescribed those. You clearly have tonsillitis. Anyways, he continues on to tell me, and I'm sorry I don't have the word for word on this, Graham hasn't responded, but he continues on to tell me that he's not sure why my doctor would have prescribed an allergy nasal spray if she thought I had a really bad cold or for tonsillitis, because that doesn't make sense for either of those items. And then he said further, "I'm not sure why she would have prescribed you cold medicine. You still clearly have tonsillitis and that won't help anything."
I was so fired up, I forgot to mention that he told me that the antibiotics would have done nothing. They would have brought down my fever if I had started taking them on time, but ultimately those were meant for a really bad cold and not tonsillitis, so they really wouldn't have done much.
I get so frustrated when I think about this. She literally did nothing. After he said this, I was so tired but irritated. You mean to tell me that I paid my copay to go see her, I paid for the Flonase, I paid for antibiotics, and I paid for all of the cold medicine. I paid for Dayquil, NyQuil, and Flonase completely out of pocket. And then my antibiotics, I had to pay on that too. To literally get no help. I still couldn't return my antibiotics as they were open. I couldn't return the Dayquil and NyQuil because those were used. I couldn't return the Flonase because that also was used. So I just spent all this money for absolutely just to keep getting worse. Anyways, due to the condition that I was in, the doctor prescribed me what the pharmacist described as the atomic bomb of antibiotics. Anyways, I won't bore you with the rest of the details. I took the medication to get the swelling down. An hour or two later, I started to feel a lot better. I started to be able to eat more, and we made it home just fine. I survived this whole thing, obviously, because I'm sitting here filming this. Alright guys, that was the story of how I ended up in urgent care for Labor Day. This has definitely contributed to a very bad fear that I have of doctors. Anyways, don't forget to smash the YouTube algorithm for the like button. Don't forget to comment down below and let me know, has this ever happened to you? Have you ever had tonsillitis? Let me know. The Spooktober merch, which is what I was wearing on the couch, is down below, and this pillow. This pillow is part of the Spooktober merch. The links for that are down below if you want to go check that out and help support me and the artists. That would be fantastic. And as always, don't forget to